Thank you for the compliment of my vest, Gregory. It's a really wonderful Goodwill find from a couple years ago. Um, so thank you all for being with us on the eve of Halloween. We are certainly really excited for our program today. I'm going to give everyone just about 30 more seconds here, and then I'll be able to give us a quick overview of what we have going on. For those of you who are returners, this is our first live virtual Leader Lab. So it's going to seem a little bit different than some of the ones last year. And those of you who this is your first year at Think Cook Leadership, this is one of my favorite events per semester. So really excited that you all can be here and get things rolling with us. So people might still be trickling in, and that's okay. Again, like I said, we have a really full day ahead of us. So I want to make sure that we're not taking up too much time. So today, our Leader Labs are a time that we select 4 students per semester to get up in front of you all. They spend a lot of time, they prepare, and they really are thoughtful in what they are presenting. And they will each be kind of sharing their own leadership journeys and a leadership lesson to all of you. So just to give you a quick idea of what the day is going to look like, we are going to spend, we will have 4 Leader Lab presentations, and each of those will be followed by a small group so that you can kind of prepare yourself for what the large group time versus small group time is going to look like. It's going to be about 4 30-minute chunks in the large group, and then 15-minute breakout sessions, as well as we'll probably ask you to step away from your screen for at least a minute so that, again, when we are here, we are all here together. So just to give you a quick overview of who will be joining us today, because we have not shared that information yet. So our order today of Leader Labs, Janaya will be kicking us off, and she'll be giving our first presentation. And then Sarah Anderson will be giving our second presentation. Alex Igbabian will be doing our third, and then Olivia Trombley will be finishing off our Leader Lab today. So I certainly am really excited, and I know all of them have really important and thoughtful things to share with us. So no more of my time with you. You can email me if you have other questions, and I am going to queue up Janaya, who is going to be delivering our first Leader Lab. So everyone, please, in whatever way you can, whether that be smiles or the little clapping icons, welcome Janaya to this virtual stage.
Hello, I appreciate the virtual applause. Love it. So as Grace said, my name is Janaya. I know a lot of you, if not all of you, have gotten emails from me. I work at the front desk with Havilah, and I'm a senior. It's my second year as a fellow, and I'm also a lead fellow. And today I'm going to be chatting with you all about identity and leadership. So as Grace said, I'm going to be chatting for about 20, 30 minutes. So if you need to grab some water, I hope you've already done that. But let's jump right into it. So I am going to start off with asking you all a question. And I know you all have probably heard this before, but I'm going to ask you, who are you? How would you identify yourself or describe yourself? If you want to take a minute just to jot down or reflect on this question, we're going to be reporting back, and I'd love to hear how you all identify yourself. So does anyone want to share what they jotted down? If I could get like 3 people to share, that would be great.
I put down words, but for mine, one of my words I put down was passionate.
I can go ahead. Couple of things I put down. A student, a recruiter, a daughter, a friend, dog lover.
And I put a kind, compassionate nurse.
Great, thank you all for sharing. So you all wrote down things that were important to you, but were there any things that you avoided really talking about? If you want, you guys can reflect on that as I progress in my little spiel. And mostly, how does identity play a role into your life? Allie, if you want to cue up this poll, how many of you struggle to answer this question? Yeah, so a lot of you struggle to answer this question, which completely normal. I think identity is such an intimate, but also just like a difficult thing to really grasp. Um, and maybe you struggled with this question because you're currently struggling with your identity. You don't know if there's anything special about you, or you don't think that there is, even though there definitely is something special about all of you. Or you just couldn't think of anything specific to write. Identifying who you are obviously isn't always easy, but it's really essential for understanding ourselves and our leadership style. If you were to ask me that same question of who am I as an adolescent, I would have panicked, honestly. I probably would have said, oh, like I'm a girl, a daughter, a sister, Christian. I like to think I'm pretty funny, very sarcastic, and completely in love with Harry Styles, which still true to this day. But do you hear anything missing? How many of you added race or ethnicity into your identity when I first posed this question? Allie, do you want to put up that poll? Yeah, as we can see, 73% of us did not add our race or ethnicity when I first posed this question. And that's okay, but race and ethnicity really is an essential part of our identity. At least definitely is for me. It's a part of our genetic makeup. It's who we are, and all of us have a different worldview based off our race and ethnicity through our different lived experiences. And even if you don't think that your race or ethnicity is important, it definitely is. As a young adult, teenager, kid, even, race is the one thing that I would have not written down as a part of my identity. Despite it being the first thing that people see and the first thing I see about myself, it's permanent and it's pivotal to my understanding of self. In fact, my identity of being Black was the thing that I rejected the most in my youth. So I want to take you all on a quick little fun journey of my life, where I started, where I've been, and where I'm currently going right now. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to jot them down, and I'd love to answer them during the quick Q&A portion. So first, my childhood. My childhood was really good. I'm really grateful to be able to say that. I came from two loving parents who were born and raised in Tennessee, so they had some Southern hospitality to them. I had have three sisters, few pets here and there, and I had a roof over my head, which was all I could ask for and more. And additionally, I also had all my friends conveniently lived in my neighborhood, so I was always in walking distance of them. And they went to my same elementary school, which was perfect. I grew up in Northville, Michigan, which is on the east side of the state, relatively 30, 40 minutes away from Detroit. I'm not the best at geography, so if that is wrong, forgive me for that. And my life was seemingly good and normal on the outside, but I definitely had a lot of internal struggles. And in order for you all to understand those, you need to have some context. I was from a Black family growing up in the suburbs, and we lived in an all-white area. despite that, I did go to a very diverse elementary school, which was really beneficial for my learning and overall confidence as a young child. But it wasn't until I moved to an all-white Catholic middle school where my struggles really took off. And middle school, gotta love it. It's such a fun time. I don't know anyone who liked middle school. If you did, I'm so happy for you. So yeah. Okay. In elementary school rather, I generally didn't take my race into account that much. As I mentioned, I came from a really diverse elementary school, which was really beneficial for me. I didn't really see my race take into account for many things. I saw a lot of representation, had a Black principal, Black teacher. My mom was super involved in the PTA. She was that mom, while also being a nurse, and she worked mostly nights. And excuse my French, but she really embodied what it means to be like a badass Black woman. And I love her so much for that. The representation that I saw in elementary school is really informative for me. The faculty and staff that were there made me feel comfortable and also welcomed, which was really important for me. Everyone loves to feel welcomed in every environment that they're in. And as I said previously, I really didn't see my identity as being Black as a big deal because no one really made it a big deal. We all came from diverse backgrounds, and it really was like a melting pot of a elementary school. It was great. Best experience I could have ever asked for. But if we want to go into middle school, which was not the best time, I can honestly say, despite it being a really unfortunate time in my life, it was the most impactful in my life, truly. I went to Our Lady of Sorrows Catholic School, which I can tell you there was a lot of sorrows that occurred there. And I'll get into that soon. Yeah, so it was an all-white middle school, and I was the new kid. Specifically, I was the new Black kid. I can recall a total of 2 or 3, give or take, other Black kids in my grade the entirety of my middle school experience. There was definitely a lack of representation. There were no Black teachers, staff, counselors, no representation at all. During my time in middle school, I, had a lack of representation. I heard the N-word being used for the first time, which was unfortunately directed at me. And I experienced racism from my teacher, which undoubtedly ruined my confidence in academia, which then resulted in me receiving poor grades for the entirety of middle school into high school. And I guess you never realize how impactful the relationships you have with your educators until you're the only one raising your hand in the classroom and they refuse to call on you. You don't realize how destructive it is to not want to ask questions, but when you've been constantly humiliated in front of your classmates by your teacher for saying that you ask stupid and useless questions all the time, it's easy to shrivel into a corner and learn that talking less and suffering more is more bearable than the feeling of being isolated in the class, which were feelings that I felt all at the age of 11. So it's very young. In fact, I would say too young to be experiencing the societal pressures and racism at a young age. I also dealt with a fair share of prejudice and microaggressions, all of which were done in the classroom by teachers. You name it, it was done and it was there. When I didn't see people who looked at me, I thought that everything was about the color of my skin. I felt like everyone was looking at me because I was Black and not because I was a student and because I was driven despite my obstacles. The way that I can explain this is the feeling of the crippling fear and nervousness I'd had when I would walk into my history class, knowing that the chapter that we were discussing was on slavery. Knowing that people looked at me every time that the word slave was mentioned and feeling those eyes on me was unbearable. Or when people joked about how my ancestors would have picked the cotton that were made to produce their uniforms that all of us were wearing. And by the time 6th grade ended, I was so uncomfortable in my own skin that I can say right now I hated being Black. And oftentimes I wished I was white. This was solely because I thought my life would be easier if the melanin in my skin completely vanished. And I felt envious of all the white girls who would go on Christmas vacation, go to Florida, come back with a tan, and then after a few weeks, it would be seemingly gone. I was frustrated that they had the chance to be darker and then had the ability to get rid of it whenever they wanted. And they didn't have to feel the societal effects or pressures of having dark skin permanently. I felt so much pressure to adhere to Eurocentric beauty standards and everything that goes along with that, so much to the point where I would straighten my hair beyond belief, completely ruining the curl pattern that I have. And I still don't really have it to this day. It's coming back though. Really happy about that. But yeah, I no longer have curly hair because I was told by magazines and the media and TV shows that having big curly hair was ghetto and nappy, all of which are harmful stereotypes that are perpetrated on the Black community, specifically on Black women. I want you all to think about this question, and you don't have to report back, just keep it in your brain. What is the first thing that you see about yourself when you look into the mirror? I'll give you a chance to think about that. How many of you thought of an insecurity? Or you know for sure that if a mirror were right in front of you at this moment, you would have immediately looked for something that you didn't like about yourself. Maybe a lot of you, I can't really see all your faces right now. Insecurities are a struggle that a lot of people face, and thankfully it's talked about a lot. But what isn't talked about are insecurities that are rooted in your own race and identity, in your genetic makeup as a whole. In middle school and throughout a little bit of my college experience, I suffered from internalized racism, which is the feeling of hating yourself because of the color of your skin. Through this, I rejected characteristics and traits that coincided with being Black. I internalized harmful stereotypes about my own identity. I lived with bias towards people who looked exactly like me. And this often can happen when you have a lack of representation of your own race or ethnicity in your life. And in my experience, I wholeheartedly know that I struggled with this because I grew up in a predominantly white area and went to an all-white middle school, which did so throughout my formative years. Middle school, all you want to do is fit in, and you want nothing less than to stick out. What I learned that helped me through this is confidence. And of course, confidence isn't something that happens overnight. I think we all know that and can understand that. But being able to build yourself up and have a personal and intimate understanding of who you are, what you stand for, and where you want to be in life was really essential for me improving my own mental state. And it was really important because my internalized racism really consumed me. It was in every thought of mine. It was present 24/7. It was there when I browsed the makeup aisles for a concealer that matched my skin and then left with nothing because no brands made makeup that was dark enough for me. It was hard to find value in myself and see myself as a beautiful Black woman when I couldn't find anything that was made for me. My insecurities about being Black was deeper than the pimples on my skin when I hit puberty, but resolved with pimple cream and dermatologist appointments. My hatred for being Black was deeper than the crooked teeth that I had that was eventually fixed with braces, and the curly hair that I killed with heat damage so it would be straight mostly. All of those things which I could change. I got braces, was able to fix my acne. Those were all temporary things for me. But the color of my skin wasn't. That's not something that's ever going to go away. And I mean, I guess if someone wanted to, that wouldn't be very nice to your skin. Like skin bleaching is a thing, but I'm not planning on doing that. And I had to work tirelessly to undo a lot of toxic learning in stereotypes that I internalized because I was insecure about something that was never going to go away. And truthfully, I hope that is something that none of you ever have to face because it is a mental battle and it sucks. And my internalized racism affected my leadership and identity in a way that I could not have imagined. Allie, if you want to put up the poll, do you consider yourself to be an authentic leader? This was something that we chatted about in CLA last year. And for those of you who don't know, authentic leadership basically just means, are you showing up as a leader as yourself consistently, or are you showing up as someone else in your leadership roles? Great. I'm so glad so many of you are authentic leaders. That was something that I definitely struggled with. Now I do consider myself to be an authentic leader, but I didn't in the past. I was not authentic at all. I put on a persona to please others because I didn't want to show up as a Black woman. I feared that people would always nitpick me because of that or assume different things because of the color of my skin. And a lot of times they did. Pretty much by living under the guise of who I thought people wanted me to be and what I wanted others to see me as, I was completely unsatisfied, lonely, and always doubting who I was as a person and how I was going to make a difference. But I was able to unlearn all the racist stereotypes, bias, microaggressions, and other harmful rhetoric that I heard for a majority of my life. And truthfully, it wasn't until my sophomore year of college that I learned that I did have internalized racism, and that's where a lot, if not all of my insecurities stem from. But through the help of personal relationships, finding more representation to follow, whether that was through social media, TV shows, whatnot, and also therapy. I suggest you all go to therapy. It's really great. I was able to work through it, and I'm really, really happy to say that. And now I know that I 1000% show up in all my leadership roles as a Black woman. I'm a Black woman when I'm the vice president of the Senate Resources Committee on Student Senate, a Black woman who shares her thoughts and concerns to the Vice Provost Student Advisory Board, Black woman, the Cook Leadership Academy, Black through and through. And that is something that I would never have said in middle school or even in high school even. And I like to think that that's some great character development for me. Love that. Yeah, I'm really happy about that. So to wrap things up, I want to ask you all this question again. And you don't have to share out, but just think about this in your mind. Who are you? Did you add any characteristics? Did you maybe take some things out that didn't feel as important to you as at the time? And did you learn from my story? If I were to identify myself and build on what I described myself in middle school, I would have added that I'm a leader, I'm passionate, strong, driven, empathetic, and more importantly, I am a Black woman. And that is how I identify myself. The person you were a day ago, a month ago, a year ago, doesn't have to be the person that you are today or even tomorrow. And honestly, it's great to grow as a person and a leader, because without that, you're just going to be stagnant in time. And as time progresses, you want to progress with it. And if we did not all grow, I would still be the same insecure, sad, and lonely Janiyah that I was in middle school, who hated being Black and who was constantly running from myself out of fear. But now, can't say that, which is 1000% great for me. And you all can take the steps to understanding who you are and how identity plays a role into your overall life in leadership. All you have to do is put in the work. Thank you. That's all I have.
Janiyah, thank you so much for being so vulnerable. I know that that's really, it's a really tough topic, and I am really grateful for you sharing that identity development with us. So thank you. I think a lot of people probably echo that sentiment. We have about 5-10 minutes here as a large group. Does anyone have any questions for Janiyah before we break into small groups?
I have one quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Janiyah, you mentioned that like you had to deal with like internalized racism and stuff like that, and it seems like you've been like on a really good path to like overcome that. Do you still find yourself like having to like kind of like deal with that and having like, do you still have those internal thoughts every now and then? And like, if so, like how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I realized that I had still some remnants of bias play into my life. I worked at Target over the summer as I was looking for a job with the pandemic and all. And I definitely found a lot of bias play into how I did my job. There's a lot of rhetoric in the world that, you know, all Black people are criminals and that they are looking to steal. And that is something that I realized when I was, you know, checking people out in Target, that I would be more suspicious if a Black family were to hand me a bunch of cash rather than a white family. And, you know, that's really unfortunate to say, but it is something that I'm still unlearning. But what's helped me is that, you know, voice in the back of my head where I'm like, Janiyah, you know, that's not true. And that's really messed up. And assuming that of someone when, you know, they literally did nothing wrong. They're just handing you money. It's just, that's not cool. It's not okay. So just checking myself and holding myself accountable is what has helped me.
Thank you.
I had a question about you coming to terms with what was the thing that was pressing in your life with the internalized racism. Was it a process to come to that realization, or was there like a specific like aha moment where it all clicked?
I think I definitely knew where I lied. I just didn't know why I felt the way that I did. And it was really interesting. I was talking to my family about this, and it was kind of like just chit-chatting, like, did you guys know that I kind of dealt with this? And they were like, oh, honey, yes, we did. It was just one of those things where I had to unlearn everything on my own. And of course, they gave me the tools to unlearn everything and build up my own confidence. But yeah, it was a time.
We have time for one more question if anyone else has a question they want to ask.
I have
Got it.
one.
Oh, go ahead.
Janaya, first of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for sharing. It was a really great leader lab, and I like how interactive it was. So, of course, you would find a way to make online leader labs interactive and engaging. So, thank you for that. My next question is, I see how race really focuses in on like a tough part of your identity for you to think about. And my question is, are there any other things that intersect with race that make it more complicated for you to develop an identity around? Like, how does intersectionality play out in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the role of intersectionality really played out when, I'm sure most of you have heard the sentiment of like, not everything's about race. And that was one of the things that I really internalized and was like, okay, like struggling with my identity because not everything's about race. And I don't want to make everything about race, even though at the same time, if it's about race, it's because that's someone's identity and their identity is being threatened in some way. So the intersectional approach that I took is that it's okay if you lead with the lens of your identity. So when I'm showing up to different conversations, I have different lived experiences and I use those to vocalize my concerns or figure out a way to create an equitable experience on campus. Like in Student Senate, when we were seeing a lot of the racial tensions erupt in the United States, I was, of course, showing up as a senator, but as a Black senator, and how it impacted me personally and going through those decisions that we made and conversations about how do we accommodate the Black students on campus. That's really when I was able to really find the perfect balance of being a leader, but also knowing like, it's like, I'm Black, I can't help that. And I'm going to show up as a Black woman in everything that I do. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, totally. Thanks.
Well, I'm going to pop us back into gallery view here so that we can all give Janaya a virtual round of applause for that exceptional leader lab. Janaya, thank you so much. All right, everyone, I know that sometimes when we pull you back from small groups, you're in the middle of a conversation, so I apologize if that's the case. Don't worry, we will go back to small groups. You can do a quick wrap up of that previous conversation before diving into the next. I am going to, again, you don't need to see me very long. Thank you again, Janaya. Thank you all for engaging in conversation within your small groups. And I'm going to pass our screen, if we can do some virtual applause, virtual welcoming of Sarah Anderson to kick off our second Leader Lab for the day.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Anderson. This is my very first time at CLA, and it's my first time doing all this, so bear with me as I'm figuring it out. So I am a non-traditional student at GVSU, as I am a student veteran. I served just shy of 8 years in the United States Marine Corps. And because of that, I got a different take on leadership in kind of a unique way. While serving, I was exposed to a culture of the military that focused on warfare. Everything we did was aimed at the success of a mission or a common goal. This is why I'm so passionate about the topic I'm going to be discussing today. If I can just share my screen. Here we go. Hope everyone can see this. The topic is called the warrior ethos. It's something that was prevalent in my young adult years when I enlisted in the military, and even now that I am no longer in the military, but continuing my leadership journey. The concept of the warrior ethos spans throughout recorded history and has remained constant from the days of Alexander the Great to the war today in Afghanistan. While warfare has evolved and changed, the concepts of leadership through honor, courage, and commitment remain the same. One of the required reading materials I had while I was serving was this book by Steven Pressfield called The Warrior Ethos. And it's one of the sources I use to help break down easily what the warrior ethos is, why it's important in leadership today, and how you can incorporate it in your leadership style. And this is kind of what I'm going to be talking about today, breaking it down. What is it? Where does it come from? The purpose and how it's relevant in your leadership journey. In order to understand what the warrior ethos is, we must define what it means. Ethos is the characteristic spirit of a culture, era, or community that is manifested in its beliefs and aspirations. A warrior ethos is held within a warrior culture. This means the spirit, code, values, characteristics, and attribute of that warrior culture. And this concept is vital in leadership, whether on the battlefield or in a learning environment like we are in today, or when we find ourselves leading in an organization or team environment in the future. Steven Pressfield, the author of the book I just held up, said this about the warrior ethos. The warrior ethos is intended not only for men and women in uniform, but artists, entrepreneurs, and other warriors in other walks of life. The goal is to bring the warrior ethos into our world so you can see the value of learning it and incorporating it in your leadership style. So I'm going to go through the history just briefly, like how it began and why it's relevant today. At the beginning, the code was evolved from groups of people just trying to survive together, like bands of hunters and people growing communities. They only found success when they learned to live by a code. And learn to trust each other. This varies from culture to culture now because people have spread out across the earth throughout history. And eventually when these societies grew, the code developed and turned inward. Not necessarily a eye for an eye mentality anymore, but represented inner strength and a standard of honor. So the reason we don't really see the warrior ethos around us today is because the American culture is different from the societies that I'm about to mention. Cultures like the Samurai, the Spartans, Sioux, Comanche, the Maasai tribes of Africa, and the Pashtun tribes in Afghanistan, those are warrior cultures. The American culture is an individualistic culture. And I just wanted to break down kind of the difference between these two cultures. But the biggest highlight for me is we have a warrior culture within the US, and those are the military branches. And this is why I'm so passionate about this topic, is because from the age of 18 to 26, I was immersed in a warrior culture. And now leaving is just why a lot of veterans struggle transitioning out of the military, is because they're thrown into an individualistic one. So here's just kind of a little bit of a breakdown. An individualistic culture values wealth and celebrity, whereas warrior ones value honor. And like the goal for an individual culture like America is like luxury and ease, whereas warrior cultures almost pursue adversity just to keep training, and they take pride in it. Individual freedom is important in the US society, but cohesion, unity, and obedience is more of a priority in the warrior one. In an individual culture, you can get jailed for aggression, but in a warrior culture, it's like valued. Aggression and competitiveness is a highlight. We used to call it the pit. That we whenever there was an issue, not a serious one, but we would train together, we'd fight, we'd grapple, and we just have a docked by to make sure no one got seriously injured. But it was something we constantly trained for. And individual cultures, they kind of look to pursue their own people's own career, whereas in a warrior culture, personal careers aren't really the priority. I mean, it happens, you pick up rank and keep going, but they benefit off of virtue as like a group mentality. So there are many attributes to the warrior ethos, but for the sake of time, we're going to discuss these: love over fear, lead by example, determination, and selflessness. And I know there are many veterans, or a few veterans, in the Cook Leadership Academy right now. And if some of this should be a refresher for you, but I hope you can look back at your ethos and kind of continue to incorporate it into your leadership style today. One of the main reasons the warrior ethos was established was to combat fear. Love is the opposite of fear. It's not natural to run towards the sound of gunfire or a rushing enemy horde. So how can someone be so intent on their mission that they reject all human instinct, even to death, to complete it? These people live by a warrior code. In the Marine Corps, we study past warrior cultures to understand how to better be effective unit and effectively pursue our mission. One major focus of study, which many of you may have heard of, is from the popular movie 300, is the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartan soldiers took on the great Persian army, 2 million strong. And as many of you are aware, all 300 of the Spartans died in the battle, but they fought so fiercely that their actions are remembered even today, and their tactics are studied in US military history. Tactics studied in US military today. According to the research done by Pressfield, on the final day of the Battle of Thermopylae, the surviving Spartans knew they were going to die. They turned to their leader, Dieneces, for strength and advice on what they should think when they faced the end. Dieneces responded to them by telling them not to fight for the love of country, patriotism, home, duty. He said, "Fight for this alone. The man who stands at your shoulder, he is everything, and everything is contained in him." Dieneces emphasized love for your fellow man above anything else, to reject fear of death and empower their honor. This is still a core value today. In the US military, people come from all walks of life. It is one of the most diverse environments in our nation, but they are willing to put aside cultural differences and call each other brother and sister. Race, gender, religion, politics, none of it matters. These warriors live by a code. One so powerful that has stood the test of time from the ancient Greeks to today. During my time in service, I had the pleasure of serving alongside many warriors. Any military member who has touched combat in any aspect will tell you that when you are in the thick of battle, the only thing that matters is the Marine to the right or left of you, and not necessarily patriotism, duty, and the reason you chose to join in the first place. So you might be saying to yourself, "Thanks, Sarah. This is a cool history lesson, but how does this pertain to me? I'm going into computer science or nursing or public relations or marketing, engineering. I will not be facing the Taliban anytime soon on a battlefield and will never experience a combat environment." Maybe so, but warriors are not limited to a battlefield. And this is why I am presenting this warrior ethos presentation to you. What happens when one of the people you are in charge of one day is struggling? Do we just say we aren't paid enough to show support or empathy? Maybe someone else will do something for them. We don't do that. That's not real leadership. The warrior ethos is living by a code, one of selflessness, love, courage, and belief. Effective leaders may put the mission as a priority, but they never forget the people making the mission happen. On September 15, 1950, Marines were ordered to assault the beach at the Battle of Incheon during the Korean War. First Lieutenant Baldomero Lopez was the leader of a platoon heading to shore. But just before they landed, they endured heavy fire and were pinned down. Unable to leave the boat safely, they had the choice. They could stay in the boat and be killed, or they can leave the boat and be killed. Lopez saw his men unsure and afraid to face the gunfire, so he boldly stated, "Follow me." He was captured in this iconic image, one of the most famous ones of the Korean War, scaling the wall alone shortly before all of his Marines followed him. His act of bravery ultimately caused him his life, but his Marines followed, saving most of their lives and giving them the courage to push forward. Lopez ran towards a machine gun nest, was wounded as he threw a grenade. It landed next to him and his men. He was unable to rethrow it because he was injured, so he brought the grenade to his chest, where it detonated. He gave his life so the grenade would not harm his Marines. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously for his actions the following year. The story of Lieutenant Baldomero Lopez stuck with me as a Marine, as a man who not only conquered his fear for love of his men, but also knew that as their commander, it was up to him to inspire, lead, and push forward, and no one else. Our actions probably won't be jumping on a literal grenade or scaling a wall, being pelted by enemy fire like Lopez, but when you are in charge of a person or group of people in a professional environment, your choice is between becoming a supervisor or a leader. Leaders are in the thick of it with their team, and supervisors simply order around without care for anything but the actual task. I reached out to my friend Junior, who has done many tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, serving as a Green Beret in the US Army Special Forces. And I asked him what advice I should give during this presentation about leading from example. And he said, let your actions speak for you. Never ask anything of others that you are not willing to do yourself. And this kind of made me think of a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. He said, it's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. Teddy Roosevelt, as many as you know, served as the 26th president of the United States. And he also led the Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War, where he returned with a hero's welcome. He believed in the warrior ethos and leading by example. Another important aspect of the warrior ethos that leaders should possess is determination. In two of the branches of the US military, determination is highlighted as one of the most important parts of the code they live by. The US Army warrior ethos states, I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit, and I will never leave a fallen comrade. The US Marine Corps keeps a strict adherence to the core values of honor, courage, and commitment. I know the other branches of the military have, I have not named, also keep determination to duty as one of their code, like values of code of conduct, but I wanted to highlight these two. Their values and ethos are like oaths these soldiers and Marines swear, and it is evident in their lives as they continue to push forward to the mission. Stephen Pressfield recognized the importance of determination when he wrote, the will to fight, the passion to be great, is an indispensable aspect of the warrior ethos. This in turn is inspiring those in your charge can only happen if a leader contains determination. At the beginning of my Marine Corps career, one of my leaders at the time, and now friend, Dorian Gardner, was my supervisor and fellow combat correspondent. Gardner, however, was missing an eye and had a pretty gnarly scar on the left side of his face. On his second deployment to Afghanistan, his unit took fire. He laid on the ground to return fire in the prone position, and he heard a whistling sound. It was a mortar, and it came and hit him. The shrapnel pierced his eye and broke his skull. He recovered, and he could have chosen to medically retire with full benefits from the government, paycheck the rest of his life, and good medical care. After all, he was a photographer that couldn't see. He lost all vision in one eye, obviously, and the second eye he had barely any vision there. He chose to return to duty, though. That's when he impacted my life as a leader by teaching me devotion to duty and pride in being part of something bigger than yourself. Gardner showed me as my leader that there are no excuses. If you commit to something, you see it through. He committed to teaching and mentoring Marines like me, and I don't think he actually understands the impact he had on my life and those around me. Just by leading by example, loving his Marines around him, and being determined to keep fighting for the Marine to the right or left of him. Gardner even walked away from the 2018 Warrior Games with 6 gold medals, breaking multiple records in swimming and track and field. This seems remarkable, maybe even one of a kind, but he's not the only example of this type of warrior ethos. Nicholas Lavery, a Green Beret in the US Army, recently gave a TED Talk on the warrior ethos. In 2013, he lost his right leg from machine gun fire. And I'll let you let that sink in. He lost his right leg and yet returned to duty after recovering and rehabilitation. 2 years after his injury, he was back on operational status and found himself back in Afghanistan with the exact same team he was with when he got hit the first time. That is the spirit of the warrior ethos. No, once again, you are not going to lose limbs or eyes in the battle of Al Qaeda and ISIS. But do you not feel the spirit of the warrior ethos in these two stories? The kind of remarkable determination these men have are not specific to the military or wartime. They are just as relevant to you and I attending universities right now. The determination to finish strong, to make an impact, to become better leaders in our environment, this is how this ethos can be relevant to us. Leaders need to have determination or many things can slide, and people can't be inspired by undetermined leadership. The last leadership value I want to cover is selflessness. The concept of selflessness in a leader's warrior ethos is another element that has spanned thousands of years. And we can go back to the ancient Japanese samurai for some evidence of this. The samurai lived by a code called the Bushido Code, which lays out their warrior ethos. Here are the principles of that code, and under their description of the principles are the principles duty and loyalty. They describe these two words written as irrefutable loyalty to those who are in the samurai's care. Sorry, words. And to everyone they're responsible for, they remain fiercely true. Today, fast forward a couple thousand years, I saw principles of selflessness during my time in the service. Within the U.S. Marine Corps, selflessness, devotion, and to duty is in everything Marines do, whether it be sacrificing time and energy to accomplish the mission, or even sitting together during mealtime. On a smaller scale, we have a saying in the Corps that leaders eat last, meaning that the junior Marines must eat before the leaders eat. And if there's no food left over, then there's no food left over, but at least your troops are fed. That's all that matters. But let me divert one more time to another historical example, a man that many of us learned of growing up, and a great example of selflessness in the warrior ethos. George Washington was made the commander of a ragtag group of militia rebels to go up against the greatest military force the world had ever known at the time. Against all odds and incredibly difficult fighting, George Washington led the American troops to victory. In the words of now U.S. Senator Mike Lee, by all rights, he should have been king. He was famous in America and many people would have gladly given him a throne. However, Washington thought of his people more than himself. Many things about George Washington embody the warrior ethos. Within the U.S. Capitol building, there is this portrait of George Washington handing in his commission to the Continental Congress to remind the U.S. people of the selfless leadership of one of America's greatest warriors. How this applies to us in our leadership is that we must have selflessness incorporated in our leadership. People will follow you and you will earn loyalty if you never forget who the team is or group of people making things happen. Selflessly giving your time and energy to those in your charge, dedication and commitment to them are essences of the warrior ethos. The warrior ethos is something that is taught. It's not something that naturally comes to human beings. It's taught on high school football fields, in the military branches, in the Maasai tribes in the plains of Africa, in the Hindu Kush, and so on. This ethos is molded in youths by mentors, parents, and those who already embody the warrior ethos. Mentors and leaders like you all, who have set yourselves apart from others just by participating in Cook Leadership Academy. I urge you to find the warrior ethos within yourself to help hone your leadership skills and develop the code you live by as a leader. I will leave you with these questions when we break into small groups. How can the warrior ethos be applied to your leadership journey? And how can you develop this ethos within yourself? So now I will actually open it up for questions. Let's see if I can stop sharing. Grace, if anyone has any questions, thank you everyone for listening to something that is near and dear to my heart and really affected me in my leadership journey and my kind of growing up to where I am today at GVSU.
Yeah, I had a question for you, Sarah.
Okay.
So I actually had the opportunity a few years ago to do co-leadership with somebody who was a student veteran, and it was really interesting for me as somebody who's never had that experience in the military to like contrast his leadership style with mine and some of his experiences and attitudes around leadership. And I noticed, and we talked about this at length at the time, that one of the biggest differences is I have a very collaborative style of leadership and kind of like a very like backseat style of leadership, if you will, versus like he had a lot of experience with like that command and control leadership that you typically see in the military. That's all about kind of like respect. So I wanted to ask you like how having that military background and kind of now being like in a more college environment, which is more collaborative, I would think. How have you kind of meshed those ideas? And maybe like what are some things that some experiences from the military that did give you some experience with collaboration in contrast to like how we typically think of like that drill sergeant atmosphere?
So good, actually, very good question. Not everyone in the military is centered around the drill sergeant type leadership. My drill instructors were trained to do that specifically to kind of break us down and build us back up to like kind of this warrior culture mindset and kind of break the civilian out of us, if you will. So we do have the saying, lead from the front. That is a big part of our leadership style. Is if you are not willing to do it, then how can you ask other people to do the same thing? And also there's structure in the military too. There's the platoon sergeant, and then it keeps going up the chain. In a collaborative college environment, that's not quite the case. But you got to remember too, we were also a team. So yeah, like when the big dog sent down commands, we followed them, but it was also up to us to foster that team environment. So there was a lot of collaboration within the military, just like the big structural things. If we were given a command to do, we had to figure out how to do it if it didn't make any sense and stuff. So there was like, it wasn't like a culture shock coming to GVSU for me. Like, if anything, it was more freedom for creativity, which I do think both are really important in leadership styles. But yeah, I hope, does that answer your question, Erin?
Yeah, sorry. I know it was kind of a long question. I was just curious to hear your thoughts about it because obviously, like, I don't have any military experience, like I said. But yeah, thank you.
I have a question as well. So in your entire presentation, I didn't see you mention any women or anything in the military who like embody this warrior mindset. And I was just wondering how you as a woman in a very male dominated, misogynistic environment, how did you overcome or did you see any like discrepancies because you're a woman, or was it just like team based?
Great question, Chloe. Yes, I did notice that in my presentation that I should have included more women. There, unfortunately, because of how society is, there aren't a ton of women who led in combat and have been recorded doing so. But I would encourage you to look up the first and I believe only female to ever receive the Medal of Honor was in the Civil War. And she donned a male uniform and then she got caught and she went home and healed after she got shot and then came back because she was a warrior. But modern day now, the military is really struggling with gender integration. It was a very sexist environment. Mental toughness is something that got me through it. But I also didn't lose any pride. And I, like what we talked about, the warrior ethos is something that I had to incorporate in me in order to push through strong, be an example still, and change hearts and minds of people by being who I was, not just saying that, hey, you can't do that. It was like you standing up for what's right is definitely important, but leading by example is what actually changes hearts and minds, if you will. Is there anything else that was part of that question? I'm sorry, it was like kind of a loaded question.
Oh, no. Yeah. It was just like, did you find it hard being a woman in such a male dominated warrior culture?
Yes. So I've actually talked to Grace about this on our one-on-one, but the biggest issue I had was being a woman in a masculine environment is like the femininity is not necessarily welcome in a wartime mindset. At least they don't think it is, but it's femininity in a male dominated environment seems soft and it seems weak and it seems emotional. And like, those are all stereotypes that I had to deal with. So I started getting down dirty with the guys and digging holes and digging trenches and sleeping in the dirt. And like, that didn't make me any less of a woman. That was like the kind of barriers that I had to break down in other people's minds. But then I come to GVSU and the civilian world is like, okay, that's cute. You played war for a while. Now it's time to be a girl. And powerful, outspoken women are not necessarily seen as attractive in the normal world. And that is like the dichotomy that I had to balance is like, over here, I'm not supposed to be feminine. Over here, I'm supposed to be nothing but feminine. But like now I've gained all these like powerful, confident skills. And so that's kind of like my answer to that question, I guess, is like the biggest issue I had.
Great, thank you.
Do we have time for another question? Because if so, I'd love to ask one.
Yeah, Beth, go ahead and give us our last question.
Okay, so my dad was in the Navy and he often kind of talked about these same ideas, but one of the conversations I've had with him a lot is, you know, transferring his leadership experience from the Navy into his personal life and even just, you know, into being a father and a husband and things like that. He kind of has this like blunt and like harshness to his, you know, leadership and his direction of my brother and I. And you know, he's also a firefighter paramedic, so in his, you know, leader and instruction roles there, that he's kind of had to try and tone down in the civilian world. And wondering how you are kind of rectifying that. I mean, life or death, like bluntness, harshness, all those things that you have to be a successful leader in the military versus kind of the coaxing and things that you have to do as a leader in the civilian world.
Great question. Also, I'm getting all these great questions today. Okay, so to answer your question, we're gonna have to look at the two environments that military versus the civilian world are. There's a warrior culture where aggression and assertiveness and being forceful and taking command, that is like the way to lead. And then you come to the civilian environment where not everyone does that. Not everyone goes to boot camp. Everyone's got different personalities. Everyone's got different creative styles. And some people do not respond to yelling at all. In fact, they do the opposite of what you want to do when you yell at them. Where in the military, it's like, oh no, I'm getting yelled at. I better, you know, complete this. So when you go from that style of leadership to the civilian world, if you cannot transition, you won't be a very effective leader. And it is hard for a lot of people. I personally didn't. Tact has always been something that I've been good at personally. So I didn't struggle as much with the whole yelling and the abrasiveness. When I get yelled at now, I'm kind of like, okay, like, you know, so I kind of laugh at you rather than like be intimidated. So yeah, if you try to shame me, I'm kind of like, okay, honey, you don't know what my drill instructor did to me. you don't quite understand. But so I guess it gives you this tough outer shell, but because you come from a warrior culture, you had to have that tough outer shell. And then you come into the civilian environment still with that tough outer shell, but you have to learn how to adjust. So yeah, a lot of veterans are really abrasive, especially my Navy people out there who swear like a sailor, quite literally. Like there's a lot of adjustment. And so yeah, if you ever have a veteran friend and have any questions, spreading knowledge and keeping communication open, I think with any issue, whether it's race, gender, religion, if you are willing to talk respectfully, they'll give you a respectful answer back. And keeping communication open, I think, helps learning environments and stuff. So I'm open to also a lot of questions if anyone has any more, or I don't know if we have time or not, but thank you for that question.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Sarah, thank you so much. I certainly know that I'm sure there are a lot of other questions out there, but for the sake of having some time to discuss warrior ethos within our small groups, I'm going to have that be the last question. Certainly reach out to Sarah individually if you have more questions in the future. And Sarah, thank you for that Leader Lab. Allie, let's pop into gallery view so that we can give Sarah our virtual applause. As I know, as someone who has only been in the civilian world, I am really appreciative of you sharing that ethos with us. So thank you. Thank you all for checking back in. And again, we've got 2 more really strong Leader Labs lined up for us with 2 small groups in between those. So I am really looking forward to Alex and Fabian, who I'm going to pass over the screen and the mic to. If we can all do our awkward Zoom welcomes for him to get him rocking and rolling here.
Thanks, Grace. Just gonna share my screen here. Cool. Does that look like, oops, I clicked desktop. Does that look like it's working? See my face. The presentation will be black to start off with, so perfect. All right, well, it's definitely a privilege to be speaking with all you guys today, especially following those 2 really impressive and informative Leader Lab talks. I'd suggest before I start talking, I know there's on the right side of your screen between the presentation and my face, there's like a little bar. I'll use the presentation for some parts of the talk, but other parts you might want to make my face a little bit bigger so you can see. But anyways, I want to start off the talk by telling a story to you guys. So it's the winter of 2018, and I'm driving from Grand Valley to back home. It was winter break. It had just started, and I had my bags packed. I was going home to visit my parents in Ann Arbor. And at this point in my life, I was on this new kick to kind of step outside of my usual music preferences, right? Like I wanted to find balance between music that I like and know and listening to music that I wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. So I'm on this drive and I decide to play music, and I had downloaded this playlist from Spotify, and this playlist was comprised of random songs. And it wasn't just random songs from my playlist or from the charts in the US or from a song radio. This playlist was an algorithm, and it sampled every single song that had ever been uploaded onto Spotify. Like from any region, any decade, any popularity, any genre of music, and any length. So I had 2 rules with this playlist, because I'm wanting to get exposed to new music. So, you need to set guidelines if you don't like a song. So my 2 rules, I said, I can't skip songs, and I can't stop playing the music altogether until I finish listening to a song. So I had these 2 rules, and I hit play, and I got exposed to some pretty cool music. Like right off the bat, I heard some German rap, some like K-pop. I think there was like some Finnish folk music or something. And I was like, this is really cool. I'm glad I did this. And then the unthinkable happened. The next song that came up on this playlist was titled 90 Minutes of American Revolutionary War Music. And so like, I'm just gonna play a little bit of this for you. You should be able to hear this on your screen. Right? And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like I've played the first 2 minutes and I've got these rules, like I can't change off of this song. So, and I know I have like an hour left on the drive. So this is like a dilemma for me. And I had reached this like mental limit with this song where I knew that I really wanted to turn it off. but I listened the whole way because I didn't want to break the rules that I had set for myself. You know, I had set out to get exposed to new music, and I needed to follow through. So I start with this story about Revolutionary War music because it's an example of me pursuing intentional balance in my life, even something as small and nuanced as balance between my own personal music preferences and being exposed to something new. And balance has been a huge part of my life over these past couple of years. And even despite how nuanced my actions were in finding, you know, music that I like and exploring music that I haven't heard yet, I think all of us can agree that pursuing balance is something that's really beneficial, right? Like to strive for a work-life balance and to strive for a relationship balance and an emotional balance. Like I think all of us in one way or another strive to live balanced lives to the best of our ability. And so it's no coincidence that when you Google images of the word balance, that these are the images that show up. And a lot of them are really calming, right? And they're reassuring and they're pleasant to look at. And who doesn't want to channel this energy of this elephant balancing on this ball, right? So, however, like I'm not here today to tell you about how amazing balance is, because I think we already know that it's something to strive for. What I want to specifically talk about is this phenomenon that I've experienced in my life and that I want to share with all of you. And it's this phenomenon that I call the paradox of balance. And it sounds like a really like elitist term or something, but I just coined it because I thought it made sense for the context of this talk. But let me tell you another story that I think explains this phenomenon really well. So this story takes place under the same circumstances as my last story. I was in my car, I was driving to Ann Arbor from Grand Valley. And again, it was the beginning of winter break. There are two major differences in the story that I'm about to tell you, differences between this story and the last one. And this story takes place 1 year before, in 2017. And the second difference is that I was not setting off to find balance in listening to music. I really was off to do the biggest thing that to this date in my life I had ever done. And that was to find balance for even the first time in my life. And so on this drive, I'm in the car and I'm really nervous. Like I remember my hands like sweating on the wheel. And I called my mom at some point. I told her, you know, hey mom, I've got something to tell you and dad tonight. And she can tell something's a little bit off, you know, the fact that I'm coming back from winter break and have some sort of news to share already. And she asked me, she's like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. You know, I'll see you guys tonight. Just have something to tell you. You know, so I kind of anxiously wrapped up the call, finished the drive home. By the way, parents don't appreciate that. For any parent out there, yes, as a child, I definitely failed that day. But I got to my house and my parents weren't home yet. And so I walked upstairs to my bedroom and I laid in bed and I was really nervous. I was like sick to my stomach. And as I laid in bed, I thought about the trajectory of my life and how it had become incredibly unbalanced. And I laid there thinking about how many years it had been since I had last cried in front of my parents. Or that if ever in my entire life I had told my dad that I loved him. Or that I had never even let a single person inside of my world to see who I truly was. I had set out that day to restore my emotional balance, and I needed to follow through. So both of my parents came home later that night, and we were sitting at the kitchen table having small talk like we usually do, and we talked for a few minutes. And then this moment came where I was in between bites and I set my fork down and I took a deep breath and I looked at them And my parents kind of looked up from the table, and I told them, I said, Mom, Dad, I'm gay. And so let me pause the story for a second, and let me bring back the idea of the paradox of balance. Because it's strange thinking about all of these positive connotations associated with the word, and to think about in the fact that in the moments leading up to telling them, in the very moment that I was telling them, that my mind did not feel like this. This was not a peaceful moment, right? This is where I'm hoping to get to, and this is where I'm wanting to get to. But it's a stone cold fact that I was mentally pushed to the limit, right? Because my mind felt like this. And I love this image because it's, SpongeBob making this rainbow thing, which is great for like this coming out story. And then the memes are just classic. But right, like this is where you're mentally at in this moment. I don't even like SpongeBob, but I thought these memes were great. And in a stretch of a comparison, but in a similar way to the first story that I told, right? Like I had glamorized this idea in my head of this random Spotify playlist that I was going to tell all my friends about, this like crazy cool new music that I had discovered, and I was going to send them these cool songs they had never heard of before. I was expecting that I would immediately feel like this, when after obviously 60 minutes of Revolutionary War music, my brain was feeling like this. And so that's this paradox of balance, right? It's like this struggle in the short term, the uncomfortable feelings and the mental duress and the changes, the sort of like intentional throwing off balance that only then is followed by a more balanced life in the long term. Because when my parents told me that they loved me and accepted me and embraced me, I felt like in that moment, my life had finally readjusted to a place where I was going to be really sincerely happy. And so I'm going to end my talk today with these kind of final thoughts, because it seems like for all of 2020, every single one of us has been stuck listening to that Revolutionary War music, right? Like when we're at the store and we're walking around and we're just bothered by the things that have been happening, right? And it just plays in your head. I think we're tired and we're ready for a change. And I know a lot of us are stumbling right now. We're on the heels of entering a second wave of coronavirus this winter, and we're days away from a really high stakes election. Some of us are graduating in a matter of couple of weeks, like myself, and others are trying to figure out what school life or family life or relationship life is going to look like come 2021. Like it's been a hell of a year. And I would say that it goes beyond feeling unbalanced. It's like we jumped through a portal into another dimension. But I want to make it clear that on the other side of everything that has happened this year, we are going to come out of this more balanced than ever. I think we're going to appreciate the smallest of things that we had never appreciated before. Like seeing a stranger smile at a grocery store, or giving our grandparents a hug and a kiss, or feeling a sense of community when physically being together with people, which is something that I'm really missing with all of you guys right now. But simultaneously, we're going to continue the habits that we developed during this time, because there have been things that we've learned, right? We're going to continue to reach out to people and to check in and ensure that they're doing okay. And going for walks outside when stores and restaurants and bars and malls at the beginning of quarantine were closed. And we're going to continue to invest time to like cook food for ourselves and cook for others. Like we're going to come out of this slump feeling an incredible sense of balance. So keep looking forward, take care of yourself in the day to day, and remember the paradox of balance. Like we're all collectively changing right now, and we're going to find the new equilibrium soon. So thank you.
Alex, thank you so much. Yeah, another absolutely fantastic Leader Lab. I feel really honored to be a part of the community that you all set up for us. So at that, does anyone have any questions for Alex before we break into small groups again? We've got about 5 to 10 minutes again for questions.
Alex, can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
A little bit.
Okay,
Little
great.
spotty.
Sorry, I just got out of clinical. A little spotty. Sorry, I'm on my phone. I just got out of clinical and I've been listening in on the drive back home. I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story. Coming from personal experience, sharing something like that is really hard to do sometimes. Wanted to say that I appreciate you being vulnerable and it's very insightful.
Thanks, Kenny. I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you. I remember your Leader Lab a couple years ago as well. I think when I was a first year. So I appreciate your comments, and it's cool that it came kind of full circle. Thanks, Kenny.
I guess my question for you, Alex, would be like, are there any like little like tips or tricks or something that you consistently do to try and incorporate balance into your life more consistently?
Yeah, okay. I'm definitely like I'm a super weird person. And I definitely kind of ride on my own frequency sometimes. So it's like it's stuff as small and as weird. Like if I feel like I've been sitting for the whole day, like sometimes I'll just go into the bathroom and I'll literally like do some squats or just get like some blood moving in the bathroom. Or going for walks at inopportune times, and even just making a point to be on different frequencies sometimes. Take a Saturday night to walk around downtown, or listen to different kinds of music, I guess. I think things like that help to kind of keep things on balance.
Seems like one of the things that you alluded to in your talk was that in order to find balance, we need to be able to tolerate sometimes a tremendous amount of imbalance or a feeling of being really, really uncomfortable. And I think one thing that your talk really illustrated is that feeling of being uncomfortable can at times feel intolerable and insurmountable. So do you have any kind of tips from your own experience of how to kind of sit with that discomfort to the point that it does become productive and lead to balance?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things is continuing to be mindful of the different journeys that you're on. I think a lot of us are mindful of maybe the longer term stuff, but it's also important to be mindful of the shorter term journeys. For example, like if you're a senior this year and you're wanting to get to someplace professionally, like myself, I've been wanting to get to a point where I can make a film. I'm a film major at Grand Valley and also a Spanish major. And so I've kind of had in the back of my mind, reaching out to people and setting up meetings with people that have more experience, writing things on sticky notes where I'm at in different spaces, sticky notes on the wall, just helping me to keep it in my mind. I think that's the biggest thing is if you can keep things in mind and keep them mindful, even when you're watching TV at night, when you're kind of zoning out, just keep it in the back of your mind. And I think you'll run across the people and you'll see things in your life that will, call you to resources or call you to people that will be useful in whatever you want to do. So I think that's the biggest thing, just being mindful of the different journeys that you're on and the different levels, maybe focusing more on the short term, and at night spending time on the longer term journeys that you're on.
I just wanted to say your Leader Lab definitely struck a chord with me, especially since this has been the point in my life where I am feeling the most like imbalanced and kind of overwhelmed. And for me right now, it's been kind of hard to identify where this imbalance is taking place in my life. Like, there's obvious routes where like I need to exercise more or have more social interaction that I can, but it's hard for me to kind of place where this overall like unhappiness is coming from. And so I just wanted to ask, in your journey, how did you get to that point where you could know what to focus on and change in your life?
Sure. Thanks for sharing your vulnerability. I'll definitely say that in my journey, one of the biggest holdbacks for me was that I never let myself realize that I could be gay. I think I've always struggled with the fact that I'm very straight appearing, and so there was always something in the back of my mind that I didn't know what I needed to get over. I didn't know what hump I needed to get over. I think the moment changed for me. It was actually at a spoken word poetry event on Grand Valley's campus, and I went to see this woman named Denise Froman, who's a really incredible spoken word poet. She's performed at the White House. She's a Boricua. She's from Puerto Rico, and she came and did like this bilingual, event, which was cool. And really the moment where I realized that I could be like her, or that I was different, and that's what I needed to unlock, was when she read this poem called, oh shoot, I can't remember the name of it. She said this line in the poem where it was like, pretending to be straight is like being a stranger in your own home. And I was like, wow, I felt like a stranger in my own home so many times. I'm like, you know what, I think, and it's funny, it just came around. It's like, I've always known, but I never realized it. So be patient and be kind to yourself. And I think there's a lot of stuff going on. Get through the end of the year. Do the things that you enjoy doing, see the people that you enjoy seeing, and not to say that a single moment will do it, but I think there's things that will come to fruition at some point that will point us where we need to go.
We have time for one more question if anyone else wants to shoot Alex a question when we have him big.
So based on like your talk, thank you, by the way, it was amazing. I think the theme I sensed was that your interpretation of balance is adding more things that you're not usually acquainted with or used to dealing with to establish balance. So it's like you have the things you have in your life and then adding more to like balance it out. Was there ever a time when you felt like establishing balance meant going back and forth between two or some things that were familiar to you? And if so, at what point did you decide you should start adding new outside things to your life to establish balance?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. I think one of the biggest things that I do to try and maintain balance is I realize I think we all understand the expectations that we have based on the identities that we hold and the experiences that we've had. I think people put different expectations and maybe write stories in their own head. And I think it's unique to sort of flip whatever expectations people hold in their head, because sometimes it's things that we don't realize we don't do. So for example, growing up as a kid, my dad worked with the Michigan football team. So that was like a huge part of my identity. It was like every Saturday was a game, and that was like a huge thing. And that was a huge part of my identity as a kid. And as I got older, I started to realize it was like, wow, a lot of people have a ton of other interests and a ton of other things that they like doing and are interesting and are good at. And I started to realize that, as a guy, it's kind of the thing to love sports and love football and have that be your life. But it's also okay to subvert that and to get in touch with things like poetry and film and learning languages. And I think it's sometimes subverting the expectations that people put on you is what gives you the best answer to kind of finding balance.
Thank you, Alex. Let's pop into grid view here real quick and give Alex our virtual applause and gratitude. Yet another really fantastic Leader Lab. Yeah, I feel super fortunate. I have already said that, sorry. But I'm going to pop you all into small groups to have a little bit more of a conversation on balance with a smaller group so that, well, I love hearing Alex's insights so we can all provide our own insights to one another. So gonna pop you into small groups for another 15-minute session, and then we'll wrap it up with Olivia for her last Leader Lab. See y'all in a few minutes. Thank you all for engaging in dialogue in your small groups. I'm going to pass the mic here over to Olivia Trombley, who will be finishing off our time together in a large group. So everyone virtually welcome Olivia to the screen. And
hi guys, thanks for being here today. Bear with me while I share my screen really quickly. Okay, let's see. All right, can everybody see this okay? Yeah, all right, perfect. It's just a white screen. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Olivia Trombley. I am in my second year with Cook Leadership Academy. I'm a senior and I will be graduating this winter. And I just want to thank you guys all for coming to this and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you guys today. I think through going through creating this presentation, it's kind of helped me synthesize things that have happened recently to me. What I'm going to be talking about today has kind of evolved, like my understanding of it has evolved in pretty recently in the past year. And with the big changes that have happened with the pandemic, I've had a lot of time to think and reflect on some of the things I've been through in the past, like mostly in college. And I think that's really helped me get a good understanding of this. And so, yeah, thank you. So I'm going to show you guys some pictures. Just going to click through them, talk about them in a second. So just showed you guys some pictures of our national championship win last year. I was on the soccer team at Grand Valley for 2.5 years, and we were fortunate enough to win a national championship last winter. And with that process of playing college soccer, what you guys don't see there is the pain, the confusion, and also the growth and the relief. My life was basically dedicated to soccer for 18 years of my life. And I worked really hard to reach that level, and as did all of my teammates. And so in those moments, I think what I felt the most was relief. I think when we work really hard to complete something, and we finally get the opportunity to succeed and see that work come to fruition, you would think it would be excitement and like jubilation, but I was just relieved. I was exhausted, and I actually went back to the hotel room afterwards, and I kind of had a little anxiety attack and ended up puking in the hotel toilet hotel toilet, because it was just like I'd put so much pressure on myself in that moment. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second, but here is the outline of sorry, it's not clicking to the next one. Oh no, sorry guys. I'm just gonna start it over. You guys are gonna get a sneak peek of everything. Okay, I'm gonna present in this mode just so I know that it wasn't clicking for me for some reason. Okay, so the evolution of me, and this is kind of where my presentation is going to take me. So When I was younger, it was a lot about resilience. And this is like in high school, growing up in high school, resilience and determination. And as I kind of evolved in college, it was more about adversity. And then in the past year, I've kind of evolved into self-love and balance. So my presentation really does bring together everybody's, and that's why they chose me to go last, because a lot of what Sarah talked about was the resilience and the determination that is required of people and how that helps you grow and be a leader. And Alex and Janiyah talked about adversity and how those things also help you grow. And Alex kind of touched on the self-love and balance. And so I kind of will go through all those processes in my life. So determination and resilience first. So growing up, I had that warrior mentality. I was super determined, and this was the number one quote that I would always say to myself whenever I was running or studying super late at night. And it's, the vision of a champion is someone who is bent over, drenched in sweat when no one else is watching. And that quote is by Anson Dorrance. And he is in this picture right here. He is the soccer coach for the University of North Carolina, and he was the soccer coach for the U.S. women's national team for a long time. And I actually had the privilege of meeting him this fall on my dental school visit. And I think in that moment, I realized like how hard we always push ourselves. I think everybody who's sitting in this Zoom room right now, we're here for a reason. It's because we all want to succeed and we push ourselves to the absolute limit. And I think all throughout my high school career and into college, I wasn't good at seeing what my limits were. And because of that, I was very successful because I was able to push myself. But as I got into college, I started to realize that I wasn't necessarily happy with pushing myself 24/7. And so I think that's where I started to go astray. I was focused too much on being successful and on accomplishing things, and not enough on how happy am I? How are my relationships? Are the people in my life, do they know that I care about them? Do they care about me? And I think with all of that, I started to realize that I just really wasn't very happy with where my life was and what I was doing. And this is a picture that I took in the library. And I think it was like we had just gotten home from an away game on a Sunday night at like 11 o'clock at night. And I went to the library when I got off the bus. I think I went to some like building. There was a building on campus that was open, and I broke in and I was studying. And I just realized that I was really alone in that time. And so that was when I started to face adversity. Before, I was the one putting the challenge on myself all growing up. It was fun to play soccer and to compete and to push myself. And in college, I started to, I wasn't successful. Classes were hard. I wasn't acing every class. I wasn't getting every minute of playing time. I wasn't the best player on my team. And so I think we plan our lives around, like we all want to grow. We all want to get better. And so when we push ourselves, right? We push ourselves to try to get better. And when something pushes us, some external event pushes us off balance, we're not prepared for it because we've already filled our bucket up and pushed ourselves so far that we have no room, no energy left for an external force to add another complication to our lives. And so my experience was that soccer did that for me. We went to the national championship in 2018 and we lost. And the goal was partially my fault. And that was the first time. I mean, obviously I'd faced adversity before, but I got a lot of I had a lot of issues with my team, like around that event, and the fact that it was kind of my fault, and we had lost a national championship because of it, and it didn't sit well with me. And so what I learned is that everybody felt that way. Everybody felt like that goal in some way was their fault. Like they had somehow done something wrong that allowed that to happen. And so I always felt like I had internalized my struggle. And I think a lot of us right now may be internalizing our like hardships within this pandemic and saying, you know, everybody else is struggling. Why can't I handle it? Why am I struggling so much? And I think it's important to look outward. And while everybody may be going around with a smile on their face and pretending like it's okay and they're going to be okay, I think most of us right now everyone is facing an adverse event right now. And I think it's important to put that in context and to realize that it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. And that's cliche, but it really is. And I think everybody kind of comes to terms with that in their own special way. And so in 2019, this past fall, because of that goal, I stopped getting playing time. And so I had all growing up, I was a starter. I would play every minute of every game. And this past last fall, I stopped playing. And that was a really hard thing for me. And I had to learn, this is where leadership kind of comes in. I had to learn to be a different kind of leader. I was no longer the person who was at the forefront telling, you know, on the field, being able to lead by example. I had to lead through quiet action. I wasn't the person who was going to be scoring the goals, stopping the goals. And I had to learn to lead emotionally, like the small conversations that you can have within like your social groups. And I think that's super applicable right now because you aren't going to be at big social gatherings where you can give somebody a hug and have a conversation with them. I think right now it's smaller things like texting people, and kind of trying to make sure that we all are struggling right now, and how can you take the smaller actions behind the scenes to make sure that we can all get through everything. And so I'll talk a little bit. So midway through the season, I was coming to terms with all this, and I knew I was going to quit soccer. And soccer was something that had been a part of my life since I was 4 years old, and it was my identity. I was an athlete. I was only an athlete. It was it was everything that I am. And so I was going to step away from this. And I think this goes back to the balance thing. Sometimes there's things that we put ourselves through so that we can grow and find balance. And sometimes there's things that happen to us that we don't necessarily want to happen, and we're forced to rebalance ourselves. And this was kind of both of those things coming together at once. I was realizing that I wasn't happy because I was pushing myself to always succeed and to focus solely on accomplishments and not on relationships. And I was also, soccer was falling apart for me. And I was no longer, that identity was being taken away. So there was an internal event that was happening, and I wasn't happy with where my equilibrium was at internally, and externally I was losing my balance as well. And so these next couple of quotes are just, as I was kind of going through that, it's like I just kept notes on my phone, and these are kind of some of the highlights of them. And so I apologize for all the words. Don't try to read everything, but and the first one that's bolded is the one from before. We are all struggling with the same things, so I feel selfish for being the one who can't handle it. And it doesn't make sense for me to put myself through all this suffering for what? And that's kind of referring to trying to accomplish 24/7 and trying to always be the best and number one. The only fear I have is losing my relationship with my teammates. And that was in regards to making that change, to trying to refine equilibrium. Sometimes we have to remove things from our lives or people from our lives, and that can be really scary. And I think it's important to ask yourself, and it kind of goes back to fierce conversation. So when do you need to have that fierce conversations? When do you need to take that radical step to make a change? And for this one, so I don't care what anyone outside of this team thinks. Some people may read that and be like, whoa, that's harsh. But for me, I think it was identifying with what's most important to me. And to me in that moment, I need to stop caring about what I looked like to others. I need to start caring about who I was to myself and who I was to Olivia. Like what did I look like to myself, and was I okay with who I was? And not, I mean, because when you quit a sport, like the idea is that people are going to think you're a quitter. You weren't strong enough to do it. You couldn't handle the pressure. You couldn't handle the schedule. And maybe I couldn't. And that was okay, because I had to be okay with putting my happiness above what people thought of me. The only thing I needed to care about was, did my teammates understand that I wasn't quitting on them? I was trying to make myself happier. And then at the bottom, if I quit, will the perceived negative reflection it will have on my character. Sorry, there's a lot of typos in that. I think that was tough, but and now balance and self-love. So it kind of ties back to what Alex was saying. How did I find balance? And then now how do I focus on myself and loving myself? And so this is a quote. I'll just read this out loud. And this is kind of, as I wrote this, I figured out, like, and this is like a direct quote from when I was writing, but this is when I decided to quit. And I said, so if I don't quit, I will continue feeling as though I am wasting my time, but I will rest easy, because in the eyes of society, persevering is what somebody of good character would do. I value accomplishments. So accomplishing a good character would make me feel good, but I also do not want to fall into the trap of always trying to accomplish and neglect my happiness, which is what I have been doing for so long, because that is a huge part of my character. Determination, resilience, that's a huge part of who we as people are. We want to be pushing ourselves, and that's how you become successful. So I'll continue. So the question is, should I break the cycle or not? Should I start valuing my happiness as much as I value my accomplishments? Should I change my priorities in life and value happiness more than accomplishments? That sounds ludicrous, but at the same time, so reasonable to me, because isn't the ultimate goal in life to be happy? My character has always been so hell-bent on achievement that I struggle to stop and be happy. Maybe this is my foot in the door to changing that mindset, but will I be a less successful person if I change that mindset? And so what you guys see there is just my wheels turning. I'm like, if success doesn't equate to happiness, do I want to be successful, or do I want to be happy? And I think that was a huge dichotomy in my life, that I didn't understand that there could be a balance. And like I said, sorry for the two my's, but my foot really was in the door. Soccer had given me that wedge. Soccer challenging me, and then also me realizing that I wasn't happy, had given me that wedge. And I just had to have that fierce conversation with my coach and say, listen, this isn't what's making me happy. I need to step away. And this is kind of my takeaway from it. It's time for me to start valuing my happiness as much as I value my accomplishments. And I think it's important to realize that you can have both. And especially now, I think we may be taking more actions now that are geared towards happiness and towards kind of not focusing on so much accomplishment, just because it's difficult to accomplish right now. There's a lot of obstacles in our way. And so I think it's finding that balance from moment to moment. I think somebody asked Alex a question about how does he find balance? What things does he do? And I think it's just constantly checking in with yourself, from day to day. When your alarm goes off at 6 a.m., are you really just pushing yourself too hard, or should you wake up? Do you have a lot of homework to do? And I think it's just like a moment to moment thing. At least for me, that's how I've kind of come to see balance, and checking in with myself. And in the past year, I've gotten a lot better at that. And I think this pandemic has definitely forced me to, more so because I've been forced into submission. I physically, like, we can't do as much. So I think this is a really unique opportunity to start to listen to yourself and see when you're pushing too hard. And so the next couple of things are just pictures of what balance has looked like in my life. I'm done with soccer now. I stepped away from the team this fall. And so I've had a lot of time this fall to just travel. And here are some pictures of that, me just living life. And I think one takeaway I want to give you guys, and this is my favorite quote. Life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Wow, what a ride." And that's my favorite quote because I think it embodies both of what I'm trying to do now. It's a great ride because you had so much fun and you did so much, but I think it's important to remember the fun part, and not just push. I think Camila, we talked today about how she's pushing herself really hard right now and trying to find that balance in allocate the challenges you face to other people, bring people into your life who can advise you. I think right now more than ever we need to lean on the people around us. And so yeah, I'll jump down to my questions, and that is this. Can you think of a time that you have faced adversity and how has that shaped your identity? So think about a challenge you've faced, or it can either be internally made, so a challenge that you enforced on yourself, or externally, something unexpected. And how did that shape who you are? And yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Olivia. Even through technological difficulties. Excellent job. Well done. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I know as someone who was kind of, I think we talked even the week that you quit the team. So it's nice to hear kind of how you have processed that and how you have grown from it and where you are now. Super, super happy that you were able to share that with us. So thank you. Well done. Real quick, Trey, I know you just shared that in the chat and I appreciate that. But anyone, we have about, again, 5 to 10 minutes to ask Olivia some questions before we do that reflecting on adversities in our own lives within our small groups. Does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask Olivia a question or two?
Yeah, I have a question. So I recently kind of made, oh wow, I'm like spotlighted. I don't know about that.
Alex. Sure.
I made a similar decision this fall to kind of like, quit things and, quit and like move on. And I think for me, COVID had a lot to do with that. And it sounds like to you, it was kind of something that happened a while ago, but I was wondering if COVID like impacted your decision or if that made it easier or harder to make that choice.
Yeah, so I actually quit before COVID was even a thing.
Okay.
We won the national championship and I quit like a week later. And it was honestly, looking back now, because of COVID, like I wouldn't have really had a season anyways. So it worked out really great because I didn't end up missing any soccer. And so I think that, yeah, COVID didn't have an impact, but it certainly has had an impact on my life since. And I think with the extra time to enjoy ourselves, I have started to like realize that I don't want to give that time up. I've done some things that I've really enjoyed lately. And when life does go back to normal, I don't want to sacrifice those added things that I've started to enjoy. And so I think when we do start to have more put on our plates in the future, I'm going to make a bigger effort to try to maintain that added extra time from that COVID has given us.
Thank you.
I have a question. How Well, you said that soccer became your identity because it was 18 years of your life you dedicated blood, sweat, and tears. And now that you are starting a new chapter, how do you feel like your identity is going to be affected in this way?
Yeah, so soccer was my life, but I think in those 18 years, obviously I was doing other things. And I am so grateful for everything that I went through. And I think that's another thing to appreciate is that when we do face adversity and when you're answering those challenges questions, like when you do face challenges, it's not something to look down on. Like you should embrace challenges. And so everything I went through with soccer, I learned to be determined. I learned to be resilient. I learned to manage my time. And those are all part of me now and part of my identity. I also learned accountability. I learned how to stick by my teammates, kind of like you were talking about, Sarah, with the warrior ethos. How do you being accountable to others? And so while I'm going to a new chapter of my life, and all seniors do go to a new chapter of their life when they graduate, I think you can carry those little things that you've learned along the way, kind of like the life lessons, and apply those to new things. So all those lessons helped me be a great student, and they've helped me be a good leader. And I think, like I talked about with the leadership, there's different kinds of leaders, and soccer taught me that. And I think just trying to pick up like how those adverse events that you've faced or those challenges that you've put on yourself or your surroundings have put on you, what lessons have you learned and how can you carry those through to other environments?
Thanks, Olivia. We have time for one more question here in the large group. If we have one more question for Olivia.
Sure, I'll ask a question. So my question is, so obviously, you talked a lot about, people going through different, obstacles and struggles, different topics of adversity, and how, a lot of people just put smiles on their face. I know as someone that's trying to get into a competitive program, PA specifically, I definitely go through lots of struggles, both academically, emotionally and whatnot. This week has definitely been a really hard week, which is why I made my comment. Just, it was so good to hear, what you're talking about. It was so relatable to literally just today alone. I wanted to ask you, how do you control not comparing yourself to others, even when you know that other people go through struggles? And when you confide in another individual and you try to share a struggle, how do you, I noticed for me, when I try to share my struggle with someone, sometimes they just kind of act as if that's not the same struggle for them. It's like, oh, I recognize your struggle, but I'm, kind of invincible almost. How do you deal with that emotion? How do you, control not comparing to other people?
Yeah, Trey, thank you so much for the question. I'd love to have you shoot me a text or an email outside of a big group setting. Because I think it is really difficult to find people who you're able to confide in and who want to listen to kind of what you're going through and kind of help you synthesize it. And it's hard to find those people. It really is. And I think for me, I'm lucky I have a super great support system. My dad is my rock. And so I think going through this, having him as a sounding board and somebody who would listen and give me genuine advice that I knew would be in my best interest was something that really helped me. And so I think finding who that person is for you is super important. And in regards to how not to have people, how not to take other people's opinions into account, that was quite honestly probably one of my biggest struggles was, what would people think about me if I quit? I was applying to dental school, and what would a dental school think if they saw that I quit soccer? Do they think that I can't handle a challenge? Do they think that I'm weak? Worrying about outside perspectives was my biggest struggle. And I think it was just for me, and I think I still struggle with that. But when you can look inwardly and really see that what you're doing to yourself is not making you happy, and you can see what it could who you could be outside of that, I just realized I had so much more to offer than what I was offering to soccer. And I realized that the environment that I was in was making me kind of a bad person. I didn't want to be compassionate to my teammates. I wasn't the same leader that I always was. And I tried to be a leader in other ways, but I think when you can start to see like what something is doing to you inside and the type of person it's making you seem like outwardly, I realized that I was a worse person because of soccer than I would be. Like, people were probably thinking worse of me when I was a soccer player than they would have been if I'd quit. And so when I quit, I think I truly did become a better person and a happier person. So yeah, I could be a better person for my teammates and for my family because I was mentally okay internally. And so I wasn't pouring from an empty glass. I was pouring from a full glass, and I was happy and I had more to give to people. And so it was hard to get there, but I think that's what helped me. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Let's give Olivia our virtual applause for her. Thank you all so much. So we are going to end today in our small groups. I'm going to real quick pop in here a survey to fill out at the end. So like Olivia said, we are going to spend some time in small groups doing some reflections on a time that we personally have faced adversity and how that's made us stronger and how it shaped our identities. I don't know what happened to my screen. Sorry, everyone. Let me see if this works. All right, so don't worry about that right now, but as you leave your small groups, go ahead and do that. While we are still here in a large group, I just want to really quickly, let's all unmute ourselves and like actually get, not that we'll actually be able to hear it, but Janiyah, Sarah, Alex, and Olivia, thank you all so much for being vulnerable, for taking on this tough task of sharing this with us as a group. And let's give one last virtual applause, and then Alan's going to pop you into breakouts to end our day together. So thank you all so much. It has been an absolute joy.